Namaste, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited for you to hear today's episode. I have on the show the co-author of a book called This Messy, Gorgeous Love, A Buddhist Guide to Partnership. Devon wrote this book with her husband, Nico, and I first became aware of it when I attended one of their online workshops. And then my husband very sweetly bought the book for me, and we are working through the book together. And it's been just a wonderful read. It's been very helpful in our relationship. And so I reached out to Devon and asked if she'd be willing to come onto the show to chat about this book and the teachings within it. And she generously said yes. So today you'll listen to our conversation about different aspects of this book. I thought this was an important conversation because I interact with a lot of midlife women through what I do, and I know that this season of life can really present tremendous challenges in long-term partnerships and marriages. And often we don't know what to do, right? We know something's not right. We know it's not working. We're struggling, but we don't have the skills and the tools and the teachings that can help us move through it. And this book has all of that in it. And that's why I thought it was so important to bring your awareness to this book and to have Devon on to talk about it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. The concepts in this book are applicable within marriages, and that's the way the book is framed, but they're really also applicable in all relationships, especially those close relationships in your life. So even if your marriage is tip top and there's really nothing that needs to be modified about it, I think you can still benefit from the wisdom that's in this conversation and in this book. Before we move on to the interview, I want to invite you to become a subscriber to my email list. I will put a link in the show notes. Each week, or almost every week, I send out a newsletter on some aspect of yoga philosophy and how we can integrate it into our lives to make our lives more easeful, to bring more depth, to bring more meaning into our lives, to understand ourselves better. And I share personal stories, and I share stories from ancient wisdom text, and I help you relate it to your life. So if you would like me in your inbox approximately once a week, then head over to the link in the show notes and sign up there. All right, enjoy, my friends. All right, Devon, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, it's a delight to be with you.
Yes, I'm so excited for this conversation. We were just chatting a little bit offline, and you and I met through a mutual friend who introduced me to your work. And now I am currently in the process of reading your book with my husband. It's called This Messy, Gorgeous Love, A Buddhist Guide to Lasting Partnership. And it is really a wonderful book. So I really wanted to share it with my audience and dive a little deeper on this show into some of the concepts that are in this book. So thank you so much for helping us do that today.
Oh, yeah, we're delighted. Since we published it in April, it's been really interesting to have these conversations with so many people. And I think we really were just sharing what we do. There's a lot of self-disclosure in the book. You'll see we tell our stories. And it's been really a delight to hear that they're landing with folks and people are implementing some of these practices and that what they're discovering along the way. So yeah, really happy to share some with you.
Yes, and I think the stories in the book are fantastic because they just really help people relate to the concepts and the ideas and understand, like, oh, I see myself in that story, or I see us in that story. And I should have said you co-wrote this book with your husband. And it just, the fights that you share in there, I mean, I'm not smiling that you had a fight, but I smile as I read the fight because I recognize my husband and I in the fight. And it just brings such humanness to this experience of marriage. And my population, the people who listen to this show, are primarily midlife women. And I don't know your age, but something in marriage in midlife becomes a little tricky, a little more complicated. This relationship that's always been fairly complicated. There's an extra level of complication that seems to appear in this midlife era. And this is just a great guide. The meditations in here, the journaling practices, and the concepts themselves. So anyway, I really think that my audience could really benefit. So let's dive in. You introduce the concept in the first chapter of dukkha. And so if you could just explain that to my audience, what that is and why that's important when we're thinking about marriage.
Yeah, happy to explain dukkha. And also, maybe I'll just take a beat and explain. So, I'm 45, and it's interesting landing at 45 this year. It's like now smack dab in the middle of my life, hopefully. So, kind of adopting that midlife identity has been a big deal for me. And I think for Nico, who's a little older, but I think it's been interesting. We've been married a little shy of 20 years. And as we've talked to a lot of different people in lots of different relationships, I think these concepts like dukkha, like a healthy conflict, they apply regardless of our relationship status. Like some people in midlife have been married about like us, a couple decades maybe folks are still out there dating, which I think is actually another whole interesting conversation to have about midlife dating. But also maybe longer marriages and children or a couple of marriages. And I think one thing that's so gratifying about bringing some of these more Buddhist concepts into kind of mainstream relationships across the board, whether it's partnerships or friendships or colleagues, is that these are universal truths that kind of ring true and normalize for, I think we wanted to dismantle some of the assumptions or ideals about what it means to be a spiritual person in relationship, because we can idealize and we hear a lot of kind of happily ever after stories, and our mainstream culture often tells us if we're struggling, we're somehow wrong. And so we start with our first chapter is called Relationships Are Rough. And then we unpack this Pali term, dukkha, that we talk a lot about as Buddhists, that really means that there's nothing wrong with you if you're struggling, right? The nature of life, part of life, it's not all suffering, but life is also unreliable. There's a lot that's out of our control. There's a lot that feels like a kind of rub or friction that Nico and I talk about. Even when outer circumstances look pretty great, there still can be an underlying sense of don't really know quite, and it's like stressful in some way, and things are good but they're changing all the time. And so this concept that it's not wrong to be in difficulty, going through phases in life of grief or conflict with our dear ones. The etymology of this word dukkha means a wheel that doesn't sit right on its axle. And so if you think about a wheel that's, it's a little bit bumpy, so it leads to a bumpy ride. And then you've got two people in relationship that are kind of bumping along together. That's this idea of dukkha, that it's not your fault if things are bumpy. And then, of course, our next chapter is like, you can be happy in love. It's not this, really morbid kind of depressing message that everything is suffering, but more like when we can come to peace with the sense that things are inherently unstable and unreliable, then we have a lot of room for growth, for mindfulness, for how to address this kind of shaky situation in ways that helps us find each other in more intimate ways, maybe, right? In the midst of all that that's out of our control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said about that. It's really normalizing. It's normalizing the fact that we don't have to always feel joyful and happy, that the bedrock of life is that there's going to be suffering involved.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your relationship. And there's nothing wrong with life if you are experiencing difficulty, uncertainty, if you're fighting, if you feel like inner unrest. These are all normal parts of the human experience. And the sooner we can really accept that as a normal part of the human experience, then we can get to the work of it. Then we can get to what it's actually trying to teach us and show us. And deepen our life and the meaning of our life and the experience of our life. And I also love that you talked about this, spiritual people think that maybe they shouldn't be experiencing those things. And it's really funny because I've often questioned myself how I can guide my students and my coachees and clients in this beautiful way. And then I step into my relationship with my husband and I'm like, what is happening? Right? Like, whoa, like Katie. And I catch myself doing it and I have to pull back. But it's so much harder in those close relationships to walk the walk. And I don't know who said this quote, and I'm probably going to somewhat botch it. I'm really terrible. I have a terrible memory, but it's like, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family and you'll
Yeah,
see how
no, that's
enlightened
it.
you are. Yes.
Exactly.
And it's so true because there's so many underlying, the history, right? And how the history comes back to kind of hijack our interactions, and being able to step out of those patterns. It's a lot harder in close relationships. So I love that you gave voice to that. And so you can be happy. So let's dive into that. In the book, you talk about deep listening. So let's talk. This was a really big topic personally for my husband and I. So what do you mean by that when you say deep listening?
Yeah, so I love what you said about this sense of we kind of have this super ego or this idealized image of what the perfect spiritual person would look like, maybe especially in the middle of our lives. Like we've arrived, we're adulting, we've got all these complex relationships. And I think that can get in the way when we really try to be perfect, and meet these unrealistic ideals. And so just recently I heard a new definition of spiritual practice or meditation and mindfulness. It's not leading to a more perfect life. It's just leading to this sense of being more in alignment with who we authentically are. And that's been my experience. It's sort of a surprise after 25 years of meditation practice. It's like I'm more human than ever, right?
Yeah.
Nico and I are just bumping along like everyone, and we're more sort of in alignment. And so that deep listening, when we apply it as a kind of mindfulness tool. Actually, in the book, we talk about the history of this word mindfulness, sati in Pali. And really what it means is remembering to come back and deeply listen. We're deeply listening first internally. How is my heart? How's my mind? How's my body? And even just that internal deep listening is like an alignment. They're coming into, okay, what's really happening for me here, so that we're not performing, we're not projecting how we want things to be rather than who they are, what they are. It's like, okay, this is what's here. This is what's true. Could be better, sure, but it's here. This is what it is right now. So that internal listening is already a gift when we can bring that kind of authenticity to relational space. But then it doesn't stop there. And I think a lot of meditation practices were so focused internally, we forget that historically, classically, meditation, mindfulness was always meant to be done externally also. So we start by deeply listening inside, but then we turn that same kind of warm, curious, open listening to our person who's in front of us, our children, whoever we're in relationship with. And that kind of deep listening fills a really, I think, necessary and basic need, right? What do we want? We want to be understood. We want people to really listen to us, to feel like we're connected and belonging with them. So I think offering that external deep listening is another kind of gift from this internal alignment. And now, how are you? Tell me everything. I really want to know. This kind of open, this keeping even your closest person as a mystery. Like, really, how are you right now in this moment? So that deep listening. Then we actually bring in a last and a third dimension, which comes from these classical Buddhist texts around we listen internally, externally, and then we listen both internally and externally, which can mean a lot of lovely things. Sometimes with our work with partners, we suggest half of your attention stays inner, half of it external. But also there's a kind of third space in a lot of relationships where It's the context, it's your conditions you're in, or you could say it's how is the relationship itself.
Mhm.
And this one, it's a more subtle kind of listening. But for Nico and I have to say, you kind of look at all of our stories, we do kind of tell our most embarrassing conflict stories in the book. But the conditions, pretty much universally, when we're in conflict, one of us is tired, right?
Mm,
That's a big
mhm.
one. Or we've just lost someone dear and there's grief, someone's
Yeah.
grieving, or we just moved across the country, or, we're in this sandwich generation of caring for kids and also elderly parents. So listening to the kind of outer conditions or
Yeah.
the relationship itself, what's that situation like, can
Yeah.
really bring in new perspective and I think a lot of grace
Yeah.
when we might find ourselves in a tight spot, struggling somehow. Oh, well, we did just move across the country. We haven't been sleeping, and there's all this other work stress and financial stress. It's like,
Right.
of course, we're gonna have less patience with each other. And
Yeah.
so, seeing that can also really help for more skillful communication.
And do you think that are these like is this like a step ladder? Like you first need to be able to deeply listen to yourself before you can deeply listen to your partner, or are they independent from one another?
Hmm. That's a great question. I don't think it's necessarily like a scaffold. It can be, especially for someone who's been trained as a meditator. We're often pretty attuned to what's inside. But I would say probably mainstream education, the sort of external world culturally that we're in some ways we're trained better to listen to others than to ourselves. So it might be that that skill is really highly honed, if we're parents or we've got a lot of friends, we're like supporting them. So we're good at deeply listening outside. And so meditation, mindfulness, what that can bring then is we learn to actually shine this light of kindness to our world inside, which I gotta say, working with so many people, really a lot of us are pretty cruel to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. We
Yeah.
have set such a high bar and we can be so kind of, critical and harsh. And so
Yeah.
I think that's one strength of a formal meditation practice is really learning that same kind of service and care that we're so good at externally to
Yeah.
bring that to ourselves as well. Yeah.
And
So
oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I don't think it's necessarily like chronological. I think
Mhm.
we can kind of look at part of listening inside is like, well, what muscles are really highly honed for me, in
Yeah.
terms of listening
Yeah.
internally, externally, or both. Some of us are really tuned to conditions,
Hmm.
relationally. We might be a
Hmm.
therapist or some other kind of for work, our job is to kind of look at the outer conditions and to assess how people are. And so I think it's good to kind of understand where are we strong, in that
Yeah.
kind of deep
Yeah.
listening, and then what direction is like less developed, and so where do we train there? Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. I think that listening to ourselves for many people is the harder part because culture hasn't we haven't been trained to do that. We didn't grow up being told, listen to yourself, go inside, sit in quiet. And so, yes, I agree. And I also think from my own personal experience and working with other people that even though we may have been trained to deeply listen to other people or even to context, that listening is a lot more alert by our own perceptions if we don't learn
Mm,
to deeply listen to
mm,
ourselves because we
mm.
start unconsciously projecting what's happening inside of us onto another person. And we do it completely, we're completely unaware that we're doing it, but it's really it's interfering with us with our perception and our ability to see clearly. Do you resonate with that?
Oh, absolutely. I love that you're saying that because part of what we realize, and I think the magic of meditation or mindfulness is that we see all of our own projections. We start to see, like, gosh, I'm always
Yeah,
kind of looking at the world through a pair of glasses.
yeah,
And I think one way that kind of inner listening can loosen us, bring more freedom is like, I have agency about what pair of glasses I put on.
hmm, hmm,
So do I want to put on the appreciation glasses and really appreciate my partner, see their goodness,
yeah,
express that, right? Or sometimes
yeah,
when we're not aware, like we just got the negativity glasses on all the time, right? Or
yeah,
like with negativity bias, we have it. So we're sort of harping on them for how they do the dishes all the time. But that's
yeah.
just a certain lens that we're choosing
Hmm.
to look through. And I think
Yeah,
we don't know we have the choice until we
yeah.
start to look inside. Yeah. So I
Yes,
love that you're bringing
yes.
that up.
Yeah, my husband, he was always very critical, just critical of everyone and everything. And I didn't understand. I was like, what makes him that way? And then through this journey that we've been on, I come to find out that he never expressed this to me before, but he is extremely self-critical. So he
Mm.
is very frequently calling himself, unkind words, saying, not nice things to himself, feeling that he should be doing better or could have done better. And then that is spewing out into the people around him. So
Mhm.
it's this realization of, wait, this is what I'm doing to myself. And now I'm doing it to other people too, because it's just my internal landscape. It's what's happening inside there.
And just that kind of self-awareness is a huge win,
Yeah.
right? Like being able to see that and say that, and for you to see it too. That's
Yeah.
exactly the work that we're naming. A lot of practices in the book are leading to that kind of insight.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it's very, very cool. I love how Nico says, so I'm going to pull up this quote on page 33 here, because this is what I talk about a lot, which is that we don't have to have it all figured out, essentially. In a nutshell, he
Mm.
said, to be clear, my path to these insights hasn't exactly been typical. I didn't set out with a grand plan to become a meditator or teacher or write a book about relationships. I just kept stumbling toward what felt more true, more alive. And I love that. I just kept stumbling towards what felt more true and more alive. And I think that's what these practices do. Like if we can give them the space and the opportunity, they will light us up inside. They will help us to come alive. Life, the everyday of life, the paying the bills and the carting the kids around and the exhaustion, as you mentioned, the tiredness and just the weight of responsibility of our work and maybe aging parents and all those things can really, life can start to feel really black and white, like it lacks
Yeah.
color and a
Yeah.
vibrancy. And this really brings it back. This deep listening, this getting deeply in touch with you and then yourself and then your partner.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you're highlighting that because I think it feels like kind of a 180 shift from like, I'm practicing whatever spiritual practice we're doing, if it's mindfulness or relational practice or seeing a therapist. I think we have these ideals about what it will then do for us. Like, then we won't have any more conflict or
Right,
I won't feel
right. Yeah.
tired anymore.
Yes.
But actually, it's sort of the opposite. It's like these practices help us turn towards those difficulties, realize they're part of life, right? Again, it's not a personal
Mhm.
failing. And
Mhm.
then our whole attitude towards them can shift so that rather than like the harsh critic that is internal and then directed towards others, or this sense of always kind of falling short of our high bar,
Mhm.
it's more like compassion can come,
Yeah.
grace, gratitude for what we do have. Or, at the end of the book, we talk a lot about contemplation of impermanence. When we
Mhm.
realize we don't know how long we have, or somebody gets a diagnosis or chronic illness, it's like the whole mind can shift not towards this, again, this kind of depressed, like pessimistic, just roll over and resignation, but
Right.
it's like, wow, I really want to enjoy the moments that we
Yeah.
have right now because they're fleeting. And so there can be this deeper sense of meaning and
Mhm.
intimacy because of the difficulty, not
Yeah.
because we've somehow like gotten it to go away. Right.
Yes, yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. And I really see relationships as opportunities for spiritual growth. Like, as we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, when it can be most difficult to apply the things that we know in our own, personal relationships, it's where you use the term the rub earlier. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's in that rub
Mm-hmm.
that we really get to grow. And these types of very close relationships are the best opportunities for them because we are doing them under stress. We are doing them when we're tired. We're not afraid of getting fired
Yeah.
or, someone not liking us, quote unquote. We're letting those pretenses fall away. And our partners really see us in ways that most of the rest of the world doesn't get to see us,
Yeah. That's right.
thankfully, and a
That's
lot of
right.
times.
That's right.
Oh, but using that as, as fire, using that as a way of growing through these
Hmm.
difficulties, I think is
Hmm.
something that we don't often appreciate, right? That's something that we can, even though in the moment it's very unpleasant and it's uncomfortable, and we're like, oh, this again, we're back to this argument again.
Yeah.
But if we can reframe it as, wait, we're growing each other, this friction, if we allow it, if we turn towards it, if we accept the bumpy ride, that it's actually growing us as individuals and hopefully closening, making our partnership closer as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And I love that you're naming the potential for this because I think we often sell ourselves short. We
Yeah.
are kind of stumbling our way through,
Yeah.
but it's almost like as we keep allowing and keep this authenticity, this honesty, the potential for intimacy, but also ultimately freedom right
Yeah.
in the middle of it all. I mean, that's the other piece I see a lot with people is that we just we think like we're maybe only capable of so much or
Mhm.
because of all of this inner critic we have this sort of underlying sense of failure or sense of low self-worth, but actually what I've seen is that there's no limitation actually on the depth and the freedom that we can find even as
Mm.
humans. And it's really, I feel like so honored to get to have this job and to work with people and to get to see their beauty, right? It's
Yeah.
like we often see other people's highest potential before we can see ours.
Yeah.
But that sense of waking up in relationship that you're naming is profound.
Yeah.
And again, it could be romance, but it could also just be deep friendship or
Yeah.
caregiving or parenting. This is
Hmm.
like deep, deep practice that I think
Yeah.
really can bring such potentials for happiness and joy, but it's not the
Yeah.
way what we think it will, It's sort of
Yeah.
in the opposite way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually have two questions on that. So you mentioned this alignment piece, which I
Hmm.
am listeners of this show know that very well because I talk about alignment all the time. Do you think that learning to live in alignment makes the road a little less bumpy? Not that we're not going to still experience dukkha because that is the nature of life, but do you think that it smooths the road out a little bit, or it just allows us, the road is still as bumpy as it ever was, or it's just our experience of the bumpiness changes?
Yeah. I think that's such a great question. And the answer for me is paradoxical.
Mhm.
I might say both
Mhm.
and.
Yeah.
Like, we can't change the truths of illness and aging
Hmm.
and death, right? We can't
Hmm.
fix those problems. That's kind
Yeah.
of part of the contract when we're born. We're
Yeah.
signing up for those.
Yeah.
So those things don't change, and I think those are probably the deepest challenges, that we do. Even if we're not in the midst of them now, we kind of know they're coming. Or if we're lucky, they're coming, right? If we're lucky enough to get
Right.
old
Yes.
and get sick
Yes.
and have a good long fulfilling life,
Yeah.
we will die eventually. Everyone we love will die.
Hmm.
And so those are universal truths. That's kind of the basic dukkha. That's the basic rub, right? Because we
Yeah.
don't like those truths.
Hmm.
But I do think so. Those are the givens. In the book, we talk a little bit about this framework of like the givens and then the tangles. So the givens we can't fix. The tangles are all of our ways of relating to those givens. And if you take a pretty honest look, when we're coming into alignment, we see, oh, wow, I don't want the unpleasant. I don't want anything unpleasant in my life, right? Of course, I don't
Yeah.
want to get sick. I don't really like this aging experience I'm having.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
on the daily. Like looking in the mirror is like a whole practice for me. So,
Yes.
we have to kind of come into alignment with these truths and we see how we rail against them, right?
Mm.
We're trying to push against all of these essential, these like parts of life. We're trying to fix them and it's all futile. And then we get really tired. And
Yeah.
those are all the tangles, right? The push and the
Yeah.
pull. And so the practice, what it can do, and this is where the freedom lies, that's so radical actually, is that we can live with a much deeper sense of peace, a much deeper sense of love and
Mhm.
compassion and alignment with ourselves, even in the most adverse circumstances.
Yeah.
Of course, we never want accidents to happen or cancer diagnoses, but then they do.
Yeah.
And when we have this kind of practice of alignment, we understand it doesn't take us by surprise. Oh,
Mhm.
this is part of the deal. And now we
Yeah.
kind of let it transform our experience into love and compassion, right?
Yeah.
And a kind of balance, a resiliency that can meet all of that adversity. So it's kind of both and, but I think, again, we kind of underestimate the power of that attitude. And when we have, and this is maybe where alignment comes, it's like when we really have that deep kind of direct look at things internally, externally, then it's almost like alchemy, right? All the difficulty, the challenges actually become opportunities for growth, for freedom, for connection, which is really what we want in the end.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's all we really want. It really is. And I think, we live in a very anxious society.
We do.
And I think a lot of that anxiety is as a result of trying to avoid these things, right? If I'm anxious enough, if I overthink it enough, if I put enough parameters in place, I won't experience this suffering, right? I'm going to rail against it. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to protect the people that I love. But if we're brave enough to really look life straight in the eyes and say, I know you're coming for me. Like, right? Like, I don't know when, I don't know where, I don't know how, but I know, again, this is just the experience of having a human experience, right? This is what having a human experience is. And that if I accept that, I don't have to try to protect myself against it, because I fully accept that this is what's going to happen, that I'm going to have experiences that I would prefer to not have. And when they arrive, not if they arrive, when they arrive, I know I have the compassion, the love, the presence, the resilience to not only handle what comes my way, but to learn and grow from it. And so I really try to help people, all the energy that you're putting towards trying to fight reality, could you take that energy and place it on learning to go deeper, go deeper, go deeper, accept the reality, and then develop that internal steadiness that will allow you to hold whatever comes your way.
That's beautiful. Exactly. Yeah, really well said. Yeah.
So another question I have for you, because you mentioned a little while ago, you said anybody can do this, and there's no limit to how deep you can go. And I hear a lot of people say either about their partners, like he's just not capable, or she's just not capable, or even about themselves, like this is just the way I am. Right? That's a term I hear all the time. This is just the way I am. There's really no changing it. So what do you have to say to that in response?
Yeah, this is another one of those paradoxes, and maybe Carl Rogers' quote. I love this quote. I use it all the time. The curious paradox is that as soon as I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And so I think that runs true for us, but I think it's also true for our loved ones, right? There is this deep sense of acceptance and allowing, like, just like you said, we start to see all of our projections and how they're getting in the way of seeing who this person really is. And they're going to be imperfect, right? Just the way that we are. And so when we meet our person, seeing them wholly as a human, and we have this practice of deep listening of like, yeah, well, I don't necessarily like all these parts of you. Or, if we're together for a bit, we notice we change. We're each changing individually. Also, the relationship is changing. So that first part of it, allowing, of accepting, of being really sort of honest and truthful about reality, I think that's really important. And part of that is a little bit of giving up our self-improvement project and the improvement project for our person. It's like, it's so funny how our identity extends then off into our partner, like I'm more upset if Nico gains 5 pounds than he is, right? Because he's sort of like an extension of my personality and of my identity in the world. So instead of looking at the way I have all these agendas for him, and if I can reel those back or at least own them, it allows him a lot more space just to be who he is in his world, right? So there's that kind of that's a deep gift of love, right? I see you, you're imperfect. I wish you were different, but you aren't. And right now, I love you just as you are. Huge, huge practice. But I think that's, again, from there, that can be a really beautiful jumping off point. From then, I think there's these ways, we name them in the book, these certain ways we can communicate, give feedback. to then say, what would it be like if we tried this new thing together? Or here's this one thing, this one habit that here's why it's like just catching me every time. What
Yeah.
if we did it differently? And so I think it does allow more room for creativity, or at least for naming our requests and our needs.
Yeah.
And then we see, because the other part of that impermanence contemplation is recognizing relationships aren't permanent. Like maybe we have grown and changed in ways that make us less compatible. And so then separation is like healthy. I think that's
Right.
the other part of our optimization culture is like a successful partnership is one that stays together. And I think we want to question that too. It's like if we're both engaged in our practice, then I think allowing healthy separation is really part of it and coming
Yeah.
to terms with that too. But we can't know, and I think sort of letting go of the agenda from the get-go, knowing that's actually going to make more space for change maybe.
Yeah.
And then we have to kind of be open to what that change looks like.
Yeah. It's a really hard balance between this idea of I love you exactly the way you are, and yet I want you to change.
Yeah.
And how do we hold both of those at the same time? And
Yeah.
in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about, doing your action, your dharma wholeheartedly, and then like releasing
Yeah.
the outcome, surrendering to the outcome. And that has been one of my personally most challenging spiritual lessons that I have to remind myself over and over and over this. I can be deeply and fully committed and 100% let go of the outcome. And it's just a paradox. It doesn't seem to make sense.
That's right.
And that's what this reminds me of. It's like, I'm going to fully, completely, and wholly love you. And yet, I also need to advocate for whatever my needs are in this relationship, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we wouldn't be doing this book if were not the case.
Yeah.
So being able to hold both of those and hold this idea of maybe this relationship it does not go forward, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the outcome of this is that it does not go forward, and that is what needs to happen for the best for both of us, for their
Yeah.
both of our growth and the best outcome.
100%. Or we recontract.
Yeah.
We've, in our 20 years together, we've recontracted, I think, twice. Where, I mean, our marriage vows were somewhat open anyway. It was like, we're going to be partners in awakening, like whatever that looks like, we're going to support our own individual growth like that.
Yeah.
And so, seeing a therapist at times and being like, okay, where are our loyalties? How do we kind of shift so that we can find each other? Naming like kind of outgrown patterns of codependency, which we write about, and really having to kind of update ourselves in terms of, oh, these needs have changed, or,
Yeah.
our conditions have changed, our livelihood is different. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a kind of cognitive flexibility that can come that honestly I think we need with ourselves too. It's like updating, okay, now I'm midlife, like that's a different identity. And our
Yeah.
relationship is going to change too. Its identity will take different forms. And I think in some ways it's lovely, the kind of millennials, our younger generations are opening up these doors for more gender flexibility, for more, non-monogamy, like ethical non-monogamy. There's all kinds of different ways I think we can be creative in
Hmm.
terms of recontracting for those needs that might not have been met initially or might be cropping up now 20 years down the
Yeah.
road. So
Yeah.
I think all these practices can lead to that kind of creativity as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and I love the nuance that you're providing because I do think I see a lot out there now that's either um, essentially I've grown and changed and I'm out.
Right.
It's just like you can't meet my needs. You gotta go or I've got to go. Versus staying in a relationship that's really not meeting your needs, but you're just staying to stay. And there's not a lot of talk about that in between. Like, what can we do in the in between? If this relationship is meaningful to us and we want to try to
Yeah.
keep this relationship healthy and strong and satisfying both of our needs, how
Yeah.
can we work towards that with the knowing that maybe it's not possible, but we really want to try?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about having no skin. I loved this chapter too.
Hmm.
So what does that mean? So describe that to my audience. What does having no skin mean?
Yeah, we use these different images to try to name this like radical vulnerability that we feel often in intimate partnerships. And I feel this also in friendships too, and with with different family members. There's this kind of, I think it's a healthy boundary we set up as we move through the world as professionals or, schools, or there's a kind of a skin that we wear, our
Hmm.
identity, but whatever it is. But like, I think Nico talks about this as like, our closest person lives up in the folds of our heart. It's like
Hmm.
so intimate that even the smallest move can actually really create a lot of ripple.
Yeah.
He's not generally an impatient or reactive person in the world. He's like very steady and even. But with me, if I'm like 5 minutes late for a phone call, it's like a really big deal because with our person, we have that vulnerability. It's like, wow, I don't have any skin here.
Yeah.
We know each other so deeply that
Yeah.
there's actually more capacity for that sensitivity.
Hmm.
And then I think in my chapter, I write some about like that vulnerability can be scary.
Hmm.
It can really be an obstacle because we don't like it. It's sort of
Hmm.
like, whoa, how do I live with no skin here in this
Yeah.
relationship? But the image I like to use for myself, because I am a very sensitive person with Nico and then in general too, is
Yeah.
like, there's these alpine wildflowers that grow at high altitudes. So climates, 14,000 feet, it's like big wind, strong sun, storms, snow, all this. But they're like sturdy in ways that then can give birth to these really delicate, beautiful flowers. So there's a
Mm.
kind of vulnerability these alpine flowers have. They seem so fragile, and
Yeah.
yet they can withstand really intense weather. And I think that's the ideal for the vulnerability, the sensitivity that comes when we feel like we don't have any skin with our person. It's like,
Hmm.
how do we use that sensitivity to grow sturdy or resilient
Yeah.
from within? So it's
Yeah.
actually okay that he lives up in the folds of my heart. And it's okay to actually feel deeply. This kind
Yeah.
of harkens back to some of our early discussions about like, we're becoming more human. We might even
Hmm.
feel our emotions more acutely. And yet it's how we hold them for
Yeah.
ourselves and together
Yeah.
that deepens the intimacy and the possibility for growing and
Yeah.
getting more free in our lives. It's like, I think what I realize also is through these practices getting more comfortable with my own sensitivity so that I can open
Mm.
in other relationships too. And the flip side of that is I don't have to do that with everyone. I
Yes.
think in some of
Yes.
these like human potential movements or this, we're talking about authenticity and
Right.
alignment, we
Yeah.
might feel, and I know I do, it's like, well, this means I need to kind of bare my heart to all the friends and like
Yeah.
check in deeply with everybody.
Yeah.
But there's actually a kind of protection. That skin is healthy sometimes, with
Yeah.
my colleagues. I don't just share all the deepest stuff that's
Right.
going on.
Yes.
So it's kind of being discerning
Yeah.
too about like, okay, I've got my inner circle, and that part is really healthy to let them in.
Yeah.
But then the rest of the time, I can have my skin, I can have my different boundaries, my identities on, and that's healthy
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I really resonate with that. I think not everyone deserves access to the
Mm,
deepest parts of you.
that's right.
That is really reserved for the people that you can trust
They have to
with.
earn it.
Yes, they absolutely have to earn it.
Yeah.
And um, they're in social media and a lot of our stuff going on right now. Sometimes we put stuff out there and then people don't respond in the way that we would ideally like them to respond. And then that's very hurtful. And it's we were never meant to live like that. That's not how we evolved as a species. We were meant to be in close community with our tribe
That's
and to
right.
be able to share with those people who know us deeply and care for us deeply. And just you saying the part about, how Nico lives up in the folds of your heart and how so even the slightest movement can like really wow. And it makes me go to the beginning of our conversation, how I said I can be a certain way with all these other people. And then I come home to my husband and I'm like, what is happening to me? And that's that's it. It's this, he's so up in there. And so it takes such a small little misstep for me to feel it very, very deeply. But I also wonder if it's partially my perception of what his role is in my life, like that he is supposed to be, and I'm air quoting here, supposed to be the person who I can trust the most and who
Mm-hmm.
knows me the best and who should protect my heart
Mm,
with, more than anyone else in my life. And so
yeah.
there's this maybe subconscious thing happening that when that doesn't happen, when I feel that he's not deeply listening or he does something that is hurtful or whatever the case may be, that's really rubbing against my concept of what his role
Yes.
is in my
Mm,
life.
mm,
You
that's
know?
exactly right. And I think that's part of the intimacy of these connections and communications is recognizing when we're asking the impossible of our person,
Yeah.
and those are kind of those outgrown codependency patterns that I saw in myself too. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, he's supposed to solve all my problems and I need him to help like work it all out together, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful. Like we've been in those stages, great. But I think that's also part of the spiritual practice is understanding, okay, when is that needed? When is it a co-regulation that's skillful? And when is it actually self-regulation?
Yeah.
And again, that's a sort of both and. It's like some of us are stronger co-regulators, some of us are stronger self-regulators. We have anxious attachment, we have avoidant attachment. And it's that self-knowledge that understands, oh, there's different skills for different situations here.
Yeah.
Sometimes
So
that's
can you
appropriate.
go
Yeah.
into that a little
Yeah.
deeper just for people who are not familiar with these terms that you're using? So what is codependency?
Yeah, I just threw out a lot.
Yeah.
So I can just share from Nico and our like. So I think what you're naming in terms of that protective, like my person is here to help me kind of. We're stronger together navigating the world. And you're right, like this person's role is to protect, to support, to serve, and hopefully that's mutual.
Yeah.
Codependency is when that dynamic gets a little bit out of balance. So one partner is over relying on the other one, and that one is like a savior complex. Like, I can help you. I really love this role, right? I'll step right in.
Yeah.
And then, me as the dependent is like, and asking for help and asking for help and asking for help. So understanding those dynamics and how they can shift and change. But we have this whole middle part of the book where we called Walking the High Wire, where we talk about all of these different kind of archetypal roles,
Mhm.
right? There's whoever is supported, and then there's the supporter. There's a need for autonomy and connection,
Mhm.
right? Or I talked about the avoidant attached style. That's when you like need a lot of room and you're kind of piece out, you're taking your own space. And then there's
Mhm.
the anxious attached that needs connection all the time. And so understanding like those are some ways that this need for autonomy versus connection can get out of balance. But
Okay.
we all need both of them.
Mhm.
So it's understanding, okay, my strength is connection, Nico's strength is autonomy.
Mhm.
And so, how do we kind of walk this high wire of balance? In Buddhism, it's called the middle way,
Mhm.
where we're knowing we have different needs at different times and then being able to
Yeah.
name that. And we're balancing all the time so
Yeah.
that we're not always in these archetypal roles of needing and saving.
Okay.
Or I think we talk about self denial versus self indulgence, right? Some of us are really used to getting what we want all the
Mhm.
time. That would be self indulgence. Others are really good at giving what the other
Mhm.
person needs and
Yeah.
not getting what we need. That's self denial.
Okay.
And we need a kind of healthy balance of both, where
Yeah.
sometimes some person's needs are getting met, the other times they're making sacrifice, and, the other needs are.
Yeah.
So I love this concept of the middle way, which can apply actually in a much broader sense too.
Mhm.
But in partnership, I think that's where that self knowledge can really come in handy, and then knowledge of the other,
Yeah.
knowing it's always a kind of compromise, right? There's a middle ground of understanding,
Yeah.
okay, when do we need space? When do we need to be together? And how do we accommodate each, even if our
Yeah.
needs are going in opposite directions,
Yes.
which will happen.
Yeah.
And so we get
Yeah.
good at kind of that dance, right? Or that
Yeah.
high wire walk. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, just naming what's there is so powerful. Like naming what your needs are and what my needs are and kind of my personality type and your personality type, which goes
Yes,
into, you guys go a little into the book and the Enneagram, which I
we
love.
do.
I really need to have an Enneagram expert come onto the show. I'm fascinated by the Enneagram, but just knowing for listeners who don't know what that is it's a system. I'm probably going to say this wrong. You may know better, but that divides people into essentially 9 personality types. And when you know what yours is, your primary type is, and then I think everybody has wings, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can have just a much deeper understanding of yourself and how you operate in the world. And when you are, and coming back to that balance idea, when you're operating in one book I read, they called it healthy and not healthy. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I'm an Enneagram 9. So I can be a healthy 9, which means I'm expressing my strengths of a 9 and minimizing my weaknesses of a 9, and pulling in the healthy aspects of the wings around me. Or I could be an unhealthy one, and then I'm very out of balance. So, but just knowing that about your partner, or I found it extremely helpful for my children, knowing what
Yes.
my children's Enneagram numbers are. I'm like, whoa,
Yeah. So helpful.
so, oh, I totally get what's going on now. Like this very confusing behavior that I do not understand is all coming into, like, it's all very clear now, like turning the dial on a binocular and you're looking through the binocular. So yes, this context, the context of what is your personality type, what are your needs, what are your attachment styles, what are your, really, really powerful in understanding your partner and then being able to meet each other's needs.
For sure. And I would say, I mean, for us, Enneagram has been really transformative. But I think any of these kind of personality styles, you could use astrology, you could use Myers-Briggs, introvert, extrovert. I think there's lots of different ways to kind of break down that self-knowledge, and none of them are perfect, or, I don't think they're proven objectively to be true. But there's something about human nature that when we can kind of have these our archetypes, maybe is a good word for it. And then, like you say, we start to see people through different lenses, right?
Yes.
There's really helpful to understand, oh, that's why you're doing it this way
Yes.
right now. Oh, I understand that
Yes.
need. So it's, again, it's
Yes.
more of that deep listening in a particular way.
Yeah, I never thought about it as part of the deep listening, but yes, it is. It really, I mean, it takes some of that challenging behavior and it really helps you like, oh, I understand why you're doing this.
Yeah.
And you're not doing it. It's like part of your constitution. And
Yeah.
yes, maybe you can shift it and maybe it's you're leaning towards the unhealthy side of it, but it's you're not directing it at me. It's not about
Yes,
me,
that's
right? It's
right. Oh,
yes.
that's a huge practice too, is recognizing how we take everything so personally.
Oh my God, the 4 agreements. When I read the 4 agreements and the one agreement is don't take anything personally. And I was like, what?
What?
It took me
That's a
a
big one.
really long time to wrap my head around that concept of don't take anything personally. Because it feels very
Yeah.
personal in the moment. When our partner or anyone we're in close relationship does something that feels hurtful or feels like they're just disregarding us or disrespecting us or whatever the case may be, it feels very personal. And to be able to have a little space, and that's what I always come back to is like this space between that initial sensation, like, oh, you're disrespecting me, or oh, you're
Yeah.
not taking my feelings into consideration, and then a beat, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, let me take myself out of this and actually try to be a third person in this scenario and
Mm.
see it as if I were watching it from the outside. And that has been a huge gift to me personally from my meditation practice.
I love that. I mean, I think you could frame that in the deep listening to the other person. It's
Yeah.
like really different when we take ourselves out of the picture and we
Yes.
realize, oh, there's a whole complex world going on here.
Yes.
It's like when we've had, connection with somebody over Zoom, and there's the box, and we sort of see these 2 dimensions, and then you
Yeah.
meet the person in 3 dimensions or more, and you
Yes.
recognize, like, wow, there is a whole fullness of this world here, and I'm like a small part of it.
Yes.
But I think that's
Yeah.
a really skillful, like, wisdom view to recognize, oh yeah, everybody's kind of in the middle of their world, and they're not in the middle of mine,
Yes.
and I'm not in the middle of theirs. So
Yes.
I think that's such a gift. It's like
Yeah.
giving them back their reality, you know?
Yes. Yeah. In my very best moments, this does not happen all the time. I'm not even going to say it happens frequently. In my very best moments, I can take a super tense situation between my husband and myself, and instead of getting upset about it, get curious about it.
Yeah.
And that is such a win when that can happen, but it's very hard. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, it takes practice, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just doing it again and again. Yeah.
Again and again. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't want to hold you past our time. Is there anything we did not cover in this book? I mean, there's so much more we could cover, but is there anything that you really wanted to make sure that we covered before we ended this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to close might be just to mention this joy practice, that there's a deliberate way we can turn our mind towards the good, or, we maybe
Mm,
put on our goodness glasses, our gratitude glasses, and we really start to deliberately appreciate the good in another person, and I know people who have, like, they have gratitude partners, but they might have a journal or gratitude, accountability partner that's just for their person, So like a
yeah.
gratitude journal just for Nico, and I'm just writing down regularly like what I appreciate, what I love
Yeah.
about him, and then deliberately naming that,
Yeah.
as a practice,
Yeah.
as a kind of daily thing. And that can go so far in kind of reversing the habits of negativity bias or
Yeah.
the kind of projections that we might place on them as like, wow, this is a wonderful, mysterious human being. And
Yeah.
I think it goes far when we can tell them that, even small things, right? Like, thank you
Yeah.
so much for taking out the trash, or you were
Yeah.
such a good parent today. And so we can celebrate that, offer them appreciations, and then relationally practice joy deliberately.
Yeah.
Take a minute to whatever it is, your favorite thing on the weekends, go to the farmer's market together, watch the
Mm.
sunset. Like last night here, we live in Madison, Wisconsin, and there's this sweet thing at the boathouse on full moon nights. They'll keep the boathouse open. You can rent paddle boards. And there's like, I don't know, 100 people out on the water just watching the moon
Oh,
rise.
oh,
And
that's
it was so sweet. I
amazing.
know. We went out for the
Yeah.
first time last night. Nico and I were both so tired. 9 o'clock
Yeah.
is our bedtime.
I
But
know.
we stayed up past our bedtime and we just watched this huge orange full moon rise over the
Oh,
lake, and with all these other people
wow.
and music. So it's
Oh,
like simple things like that I think can
yeah.
really bring back the aliveness and
Yeah.
that sense of gratitude that, gosh,
Yeah.
this moment is passing and I get to be here with you.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. So recently, my husband and it was a big joke on our end. My husband is much more structured, shall we say, than I am. So he's famous for saying "new rule." That's what he says to the kids, "New rule." And I'm always like, "Oh, stop with the rules." And so I, as a joke, turned on him and I said, I have a new rule for our marriage. We need to spend a certain amount of time every day together, tech free. So zero
Ah,
technology.
that's
It can be
great.
just sitting on our front porch and having a chat, going for a
Mm,
walk, or doing whatever. But I love I'm now going to bring this kind of playful attitude into it, this joy
yeah,
into it, that you can do these things that are really playful and fun and bring back that spark and naturally generate that sense of connection and joy and love between two people.
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
I
that's
love that new
awesome.
rule. That's a good
Yeah, new
one.
rule, new rule. I used his own words on him.
You did.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Mm.
I really, really appreciate this conversation and everything that you shared. And I really appreciate the book. It's been so helpful to us. So thank you. I will put a link to the book in the show notes, as well as your website, and any other, you filled out a contact form. So anything that you put in there, I will make sure that my listeners have access to.
Sounds great, Katie. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our
Oh,
conversation and just wish you all well. Yeah.
oh, thank you. Thank you.